All right, gents. So I'm just going to talk you through and introduce you to our new poem. So this poem could be used in your end of year practice exams or in your externals, along with Dulce et Decorum Est. But the main priority for right now is just to talk you through it so that you are ready and able to use it as one of your connections texts. So today is just to build a little bit of an understanding about it, watch along, try and do some of the small tasks at the end of it, and then have a little bit of an understanding of maybe what one of the human experiences are that you can see in the text. So the poem is called Disabled. It was released just a little bit before Dulce et Decorum Est. So that poem was released or published after Wilfred Owen's death, whereas this one was published while he was still alive. So it was published in 1917 and was likely written after his hospital experience. So I was reading an article online from a website called History Extra, and they said that there were around 8 million people sort of across the world that were impacted in terms of injuries from World War One. So that had things like a lot of people lost limbs, so like arms, legs, things like that. And there were also quite a few facial injuries from little bits of metal, bullets, any form of shrapnel, which is one of the words. There were really poor conditions in the hospitals that were available on site and off site. So they're always like a medic or hospital like facility, like a small one on battle sites. And they were pretty minimal. So often you didn't even have an actual doctor, you just had someone with some medical training. Nurses weren't generally actually trained nurses like we would think about now. All right, so remember, this is over 100 years ago. That's the level of quality of service that they're receiving. There were also lots of issues with scarring and how things scarred. So if you got a facial injury like that now, you'd probably come away with a much smaller scar, but they were being dealt with by non-professionals or people with minimal equipment. There was also higher risks of infection. So typically, if there was an injury like that now, where you might lose a limb, you might still survive, or you would lose it at a later point of your leg or your limb. But obviously here that wasn't quite. So there were lots and lots of injuries going on, and these were worse treated than they would have been if they were today. So one thing that we need to think about as well, which is kind of raised in the poem, is attitudes towards the war, and therefore the society that existed in the 1914, 15, 16, 17, 18, and just after the war as well. So think about how they viewed war as something heroic and adventurous and wonderful. So they were very ignorant or uninformed images of war. So a lot of people didn't really know what went on in war until people told them about it. And even then, they didn't really want to know about that. This meant that there were lots of injured soldiers that were never really well approached or accepted in society because they showed something really gruesome about war that people didn't want to know. And as a result of that, often they kept them out of sight. I put the wrong sight there. Oops, out of physical sight. So they'd be in hospitals or kept in these little institutions, which were meant to sort of protect the people and help the people who were injured. But it also just meant that general society didn't have to see it. So nowadays we're a little bit more accepting, you would hope, over 100 years later, a little bit more accepting of physical sort of deformities or differences, but it really, really wasn't accepted there. So that's where this poem kind of fits in. So these were just a couple of images I found online. I know some of them will be potentially a little bit cut off there. So these are sort of either just after the war, there was this like propaganda, not propaganda, that's negative. There was this like promotional thing to try get these people jobs and give them like meaning to their lives if they were back in society. But you can see a lot of amputations there. And in that picture on the far right-hand corner, you can see some of those sort of physical injuries, which obviously kind of gave people a bad impression of war and really made those people feel like they were outsiders or they didn't belong. So I'm going to read through the poem now. You've got a copy of this in your OneNote. Disabled by Wilfred Owen. He sat in a wheeled chair, waiting for dark, and shivered in his ghastly suit of grey, legless, sewn short at elbow. Through the park, voices of boys rang saddening like a hymn, Voices of play and pleasure after day, till gathering sleep had mothered them from him. About this time, town used to swing so gay, when glow lamps budded in the light blue trees, and girls danced lovelier as the air grew dim. In the old times, before he threw away his knees. Now he will never feel again how slim girls' waists are, or how warm their subtle hands. All of him touch him like some queer disease. There was an artist, silly for his face, for it was younger than his youth last year. Now he is old. His back will never brace. He's lost his colour very far from here, poured it down shell holes till the veins ran dry, and his lifetime lapsed in the hot race and leap of purple spurted from his thigh. One time he liked a blood smear down his leg, after the matches carried shoulder high. It was after football, when he'd drunk a peg. He thought he'd better join. He wonders why. Someone had said he'd look good in kilts, that should say. Look a god in kilts. That's why. And maybe, too, to please his Meg. Aye, that was it. To please the giddy jilts, he asked to join. He didn't have to beg. Smiling, they wrote his lie, aged 19. Oh gosh, I'm failing. Aged 19 years. Germans he scarcely thought of, or their guilt, and Austria's did not move him, and no fears of fear came yet. He thought of jewelled hilts for daggers and plaid socks, of smart salutes and care of arms and leave and pay arrears, esprit de corps, and hints for young recruits. And soon he was drafted out with drums and cheers. Some cheered him home, but not as crowds cheer goal. Only a solemn man who brought him fruits thanked him and inquired about his soul. Now he will spend a few sick years in institutes and do what things the rules consider wise, and take whatever pity they may dole. Tonight he noticed how the women's eyes passed from him to the strong men that were whole. How cold and late it is. Why don't they come and put him into bed? Why don't they come? All right, so if you don't quite understand it, that's okay. I'm going to go through it now, so keep listening, and I'm going to go through the different stanzas and kind of what they mean. Remember, we are looking at this for a connections report. So effectively, you just need to find one or two pieces here that you can kind of understand that show a human experience, like hardship, sadness, violence, that sort of thing. All right, so we'll start with this first part of the poem here. So the real stanza is on that right-hand side. So the first stanza, it starts with an image of an injured man in a wheelchair who has no legs. And upon reading again, the way it says that his thing was sewn short at elbow, I'd assume he's missing an arm as well. He can hear a nearby park where the children happily play, and it's quite a different experience to his own. So he is sad, and all the yells and excitement of the children is very different, and there's a contrast there. So a difference between their experiences. And they're young and happy and free, and he is injured and trapped in a way and sad. The second paragraph or stanza or verse of the poem is focused on what life would have been like if he wasn't this way. So he thinks about this time of the day and how it was a really happy and fun time of the day or the evening, normally, if he was a normal man and not kind of this crippled, disabled man. So he thinks about it's when people would normally go out and they'd normally dance, and he's sad again because he thinks about the fact that no one will want to touch him again. He'll never get to go next to a girl and dance with them because people of the time, remember, are afraid and disgusted by him. So when they talk about their queer disease, they're talking about like unusual or weird or, not normal for the time. So typically, in general, people that would have been born around these sort of times would have been anti-disabilities in general. So you didn't really see many people with disabilities, whether they were from the war or from, day-to-day normal life. They wouldn't have seen that. So it's really different. And people weren't used to it, so they were afraid of it. All right, we've got the stanza here, and then underneath it is the little bit. So this next stanza is saying that now he looks older, there's no colour in his face, he's physically weak, war has made him age, and it's this idea that when he went to war, it took his vitality and his life and his colour, and it poured it down the shell holes, and it poured it down and got rid of it. So all of his youth was taken and expelled from him by going to war. All right, and then over here on this right-hand side, there's this big stanza here, which just goes into his background and what led him to the war. So he said, it's not that he was against blood or had an issue with blood, bleeding, or injury, and he remembers that. He remembers that when he used to play football, and it was great, and, it was a thing of pride when you got injured and you just kept going. It was part of the fun. But then he remembers how he signed up. So he went to impress a girl. He lied. So remember at the beginning of the unit, we looked at World War I and how many boys, some of them were as young as 15, 16 years old, so younger than you are now, and they went and signed up for the war, and they just lied about their age, and the people accepted it. So it was the same for them. He lied about being 19. So you can imagine being potentially your age or only a little bit older or even younger, and suddenly finding that you've lost a limb from a war that you thought was going to be exciting. So you thought you were signing up for something amazing, and then you come back from it and it wasn't what you thought it was going to be. And not only that, but you're only a young man and no girls are going to look at you and society doesn't like you and you're hidden away. Kind of your life's ruined. So that's what the sort of basis of the poem is. It's quite sad, really. He said that he didn't think about the enemy and he wasn't afraid. So the line there that I muddled up when I said it before, esprit de corps, means a feeling of pride and joy and happiness. So that was what he thought he was going for. He thought he was going for he was going to have like these really cool, like a cool uniform, and he was going to have daggers, and he was going to have like salutes, and it was going to be orderly and exciting, and it was going to be joy and this real camaraderie and like group fun of being a soldier in a like a battalion. And then it wasn't. So all he could think about is that excitement, and that's why he signed up. He did that, he impressed a girl, he didn't think about fighting people, he didn't think about fear, and then, that kind of overclouded his thoughts, and he didn't think about the reality of it. And then now, as quite a young man, you can imagine he might be anywhere between 17 and 20, he's in hospital, he's lost at least one limb, probably two, maybe even three, and his life's kind of ruined. So that's the sort of tone and things you need to be thinking about. And then we get to the end bit of this poem here. So it's got that short little stanza, that's 3 lines at the top of the page there. So he remembers getting home and, he was cheered home a little bit. People were excited for him a little bit when soldiers returned home. But he wouldn't have been able to have been in the normal parades because the normal parades were for strong, whole, happy soldiers that could come back and keep up that image of war being fun and honourable and amazing. So nobody really cares about the people that come back and are injured or missing legs. Like, that's not as good of a look for the war and for the government. So even then, only one person actually thanked him for what he did and gave him something. But then that person inquired about his soul, which kind of implies that maybe his soul has been damaged, and that's kind of quite negative again. So maybe the fact that he killed people or that he's not complete anymore. So it has that sad sort of tone again. And then it comes to this end bit here. He realizes he's going to spend the rest of his life in institutions and hospitals, and all he's going to have is people telling him what he can and can't do, and people telling him that they pity him or giving him pity and sadness. That's all his life is going to be. And he's constantly going to be looked over by women. So he mentions this again, so it's earlier in the poem and again here now, which just reminds us that he's like a young man or not much older than a teenage boy. And he's not going to find that partner and have a lovely young life, not going to get to enjoy some of the things of being a young man and chasing women, because they're not going to look at him. They're going to want these men that are whole and not damaged. So he's just reminded of how injured and damaged and disabled he is. So the end bit there in the last lines, why don't they come and put him into bed? Why don't they come? It's just this idea that, once again, he can't do anything without other people helping him, and his life isn't what it should be for a young man, and it makes him feel sad and isolated and lonely at the end bit there. All right, so hopefully that makes it a little bit clearer about what the poem is about. Okay, and then you've just got these short tasks to work through. So these will be in your OneNote. Okay, so I would recommend going back to them, read the poem through again. If you need to, skip back to earlier in the video and listen to me say it again, or listen back through these things again, because it's going to make so much more sense if you read through them again and again. All right, so work through these 6 questions. That'll probably take you about 15 minutes. They're not very hard ones, I promise, and that will help you understand this poem a little bit better. You want to be thinking about it when you read it again and thinking, what human experiences am I seeing here? How is it similar to one of my poems or different to what I've looked at so far? And try to think about how it might be similar or different to Shawshank. Maybe in Shawshank you can see Andy had hope. Does this main character have hope? Probably not. All right, so listen to the video again, listen to the poem again, read it again, whatever's going to make it easier, and answer those questions. They are in your OneNote, and that will help with your first introduction to our poem. Well done.